So we've got some major new developments in the nationwide effort to remove suppressors and short-barreled rifles from the NFA. The Trump DOJ just filed another brief defending the NFA, and now the plaintiffs have fired back with a new motion, and they accuse the DOJ of breaking court rules and trying to sneak in a new piece of evidence at the very last minute to essentially save their case. So let's break down what just developed in this case and what the Trump DOJ just did.
Also, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, which is TacPack. TacPack is a subscription-based box that delivers tactical and EDC gear to your front door every single month. And right now, TacPack is doing something special. The next TacPack Plus box features essential gear for your next build, range gear, and a limited edition run of a previous TacPack favorite that everybody's been asking for. The February TacPack Plus box is going to be worth $225, and if you sign up using my code ARMED, you get a free additional $60 tactical gift, by buying that first box, and that brings your value up for that first subscription to $285 in value of the Plus box, plus the additional free gift. So if you're interested in TacPack, this is the month to sign up. Make sure you use my code ARMED to get that additional box, to get that additional gift. And again, you can find all of that linked down below to TacPack, both in the detail section and the comment section.
So if you've been following the channel for a while, you will know that HR1 passed, and through the One Big Beautiful bill, we got a reduction of the NFA tax. We got a reduction on items like suppressors, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and AOWs, and the tax was reduced from $200 to $0. Now, after that happened, there were several Second Amendment groups and plaintiffs who decided to move forward and tried to finish the job and get rid of the remaining restrictions like the transfer, restrictions, the registration process, and all of that, trying to leverage the $0 tax to get rid of the remaining restrictions. In this case, the Silencer Shop challenge against the ATF, you had Gun Owners of America, FRAC, Silencer Shop, Palmetto State Armory, Silencer Co., who joined together to file a lawsuit against the ATF. And they argued that once the tax, is now zero, now that it's $0, there is no longer a constitutional basis for the rest of the NFA. Now, on top of this, you also had multiple states that joined into this lawsuit as plaintiffs to also file this lawsuit against the ATF. Now, the core argument of this case is very simple. Because these firearms are no longer taxed, Congress, they argue, can no longer justify regulating these items under their taxing powers. And therefore, they argue the NFA's registration and transfer requirements exceed Congress's enumerated powers. Now, through this lawsuit, both sides, both the plaintiffs and the DOJ and the ATF, are essentially trying to end this case as quick as possible, and they're trying to do that through cross motions for summary judgment. Essentially, without going to a full trial, they're trying to end this, case mainly based on the briefs and the arguments that they're submitting to the court. And in the original brief, the DOJ made several key arguments. First, the DOJ says that even though the making and transfer tax is now $0, there is still a special occupational tax, or the SOT tax, on manufacturers, dealers, and importers. They argue that the registration system is part of this web of regulation that helps to enforce the remaining tax and therefore still fits within Congress's taxing powers. Second, the DOJ argues that the NFA is independently valid under the Commerce Clause because it regulates firearms that are moving, across state lines and are moving through interstate commerce. They say even purely intrastate activity, like making a suppressor at your home, or making them exclusively within a state, like some states like Texas have tried to do, can still be regulated because unregulated submarkets would create this whole gaping hole, they claim, in the federal scheme, and they don't want that. Third, the DOJ argues that even if the court finds a constitutional problem with some of their arguments, like the Commerce Clause and the taxing powers, they say that this is still valid because it does not violate the Second Amendment. So like I said, they also argue against the Second Amendment. So this is the Trump DOJ saying that the NFA does not violate the Second Amendment, and they rely on older court precedents saying that these types of weapons fall outside the core protections of the Second Amendment. But now we have a new development in this case because the Trump DOJ tried to kind of do something sneaky and they got caught, and this is being called out by the plaintiffs in this case. So here's kind of this new development that, happened out of a motion that was filed by the Trump DOJ. After the plaintiffs responded to the DOJ's arguments, the DOJ then filed a reply brief, and they attached a brand new declaration from the ATF. That declaration tries to claim that the NFA's registration system is still necessary because the ATF supposedly denies hundreds of applications each year due to the SOT tax that is issued. But the plaintiffs here are essentially pointing out that there's a huge problem procedurally with what they just did, and then also their arguments don't support what the Trump DOJ and what the ATF still want to do with the remaining NFA restrictions. The plaintiffs argue that under court rules in the Northern District of Texas, you are not allowed to introduce new evidence at the reply stage without getting express permission from the judge. And the DOJ in this case did not get that permission. Instead, they tried to sneak in this piece of new evidence through a reply brief. So now the plaintiffs have filed a motion asking for the court to strike that new evidence entirely, or at the very least, give them the ability to respond to what the Trump DOJ just submitted to the court. The plaintiffs argue that the DOJ already had months to submit evidence to the court to support their legal arguments, and the Trump DOJ already filed one affidavit. This new declaration is just a second attempt to kind of fix the weaknesses in their case after they saw the arguments that were presented by the plaintiffs. So in legal terms, it's the Trump DOJ taking a second bite at the apple after realizing how weak their arguments were and after seeing, the evidence that was put forward by the plaintiffs. Now, like I mentioned, the plaintiffs here in this case don't just attack the procedural error and, kind of sneakiness that happened with the Trump DOJ, but they also attack the substance of what is claimed by the DOJ with this new, piece of evidence. The DOJ's new declaration claims that in 2025, the ATF denied about 691 applications over these special occupational tax issues. But the plaintiffs point out here that the ATF processed more than 2.1 million NFA transfers just that year. And that means only about 0.03% of those type of applications were denied, which actually supports the plaintiffs' true argument and what they've put forward in this case, that the registration system is not meaningfully connected to the tax collection at all, and therefore it should go away. They also argue that this declaration relies on some past practices under the old law where there was still that $200 tax, but now we live under the $0 tax, and that has changed. The tax has been eliminated, and it does not explain why those same procedures make sense going forward under the new $0 tax system. So they're relying on old evidence under the old system, but they presented no arguments for why this is still relevant for what's going on in this challenge. So in short, they argue even the DOJ's new evidence doesn't fix their constitutional problems and the arguments that they're presenting in this case to support the remaining NFA restrictions. So essentially, where does this leave us in this challenge? Well, we now have a $0 tax on these items. A lot of people have gone through the new system with the $0 tax. A lawsuit is now moving forward to try to dismantle the remaining NFA restrictions, and the DOJ and the Trump, DOJ, Pam Bondi, and the ATF, all of them are actively defending the remaining restrictions. And now a procedural fight is going on in this case over whether the Trump DOJ even followed court rules with this latest evidence that they submitted. After seeing how weak their arguments were, they tried to sneak in some new evidence to kind of bolster up their position, but that was caught by the plaintiffs, and now it's going to be up to the court whether they strike that, get rid of it, or at least let the plaintiffs respond to what the Trump DOJ tried to sneak in. So this case really is not just about the Second Amendment, it's also about the limit of Congress's taxing powers and whether the NFA can even survive going forward now that there is a $0 tax on these items. And through this case, we've seen some shenanigans by the Trump DOJ, and the plaintiffs are calling that out, and they're pressing the court to force the DOJ to play by the rules and not just, play fast and loose and just do whatever they want, submit whatever evidence they want, because the plaintiffs have to play by the rule when it comes to these cases. But, a lot of times the government gets a lot of wiggle room, but here, that type of trickery was caught by the plaintiffs, and now they're pointing it out to the court. So that's where this stands right now in this critical nationwide NFA challenge. The DOJ continues to fight to preserve the NFA. The plaintiffs in this case continue to push back, and now the court must decide whether to strike the DOJ's new evidence or at the very least allow the plaintiffs another round of briefing to respond to what was just submitted. So that's what's currently going on in this critical NFA $0 tax lawsuit that's trying to get rid of the remaining NFA restrictions because of the $0 tax. As we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm and just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this type of two-way content and it should share it to more people. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.